Okay, Nihir and Bapaji, we are going to pick up from where we left off. So previously, in our very recent discussion, we established from the Torah that it will be extremely problematic for Prophet Muhammad to claim his prophethood from Abraham and Ishmael, simply because Arabs were not Ishmaelites at the time, and Abraham and Ishmael, according to the Torah, did not travel to Mecca to build the Kaaba. So when you put those two things together, then it becomes extremely problematic. So what we're going to do is just turn to the origin story of how Prophet Muhammad came to think of himself as a prophet. And we're going to compare that with Prophet Musa or Prophet Moses, as some commentators state that the way Prophet Musa received his revelation that he is a prophet is very similar to Prophet Muhammad. And we will then draw to see if that is a natural fitting conclusion. Okay, so the sources we're going to use or references is Sahih al-Bukhari, Hadith number 3, and Exodus chapter 3 to 4. So I'm not going to read all of the Hadith as it's somewhat lengthy. However, please pause the video and read for yourself should you want a fuller appreciation. What I'll do is summarize. So essentially, Prophet Muhammad developed a deep desire for solitude and reflection, spending long periods in the cave of Hira near Mecca, meditating and worship Allah. Is he here? And then, whilst in the cave, the angel Gabriel or Jibril appeared to him and commanded, "Read." And the Prophet Muhammad replied that he did not know how to read. The angel then pressed him quite hard. So you can see here, the Prophet added, "Then the angel caught me forcefully and pressed me so hard that I could not bear it anymore." Okay. And then a third time, if we just look down here, thereupon he caught me for the third time and pressed me and then released me and said, "Read in the name of your Lord." And so what we see there is then Allah's Messenger returned with the revelation and with his heart beating severely. He went back to Khadijah, his wife, and he said to his wife, "Cover me, cover me." They covered him till his fear was over. And after that, he told Khadijah everything. So he's now revealed everything to Khadijah. And Khadijah tries to reassure him to say, "You are definitely a prophet sent by Allah." Prophet Muhammad is not convinced at this point. So Khadijah then introduces Prophet Muhammad to her cousin Waraka. And Waraka, um, upon hearing what had happened, exclaims to Prophet Muhammad that that the spirit in the cave is indeed an angel, and it's indeed the same angel. It says this is the same one, angel Jibril or Gabriel, whom Allah had sent to Musa, Moses. So he says here that you are receiving wahi or revelation by the same angel in the same way as Prophet Musa did. So again, you can pause and just read all of this yourself. But essentially, that is what that is a summary of the point that I'm driving. So a couple of questions. To what did Waraka compare Muhammad's experience? Well, we know he compares it to Prophet Musa. Which story could Waraka be thinking of? Well, the only time Moses interacted with the angel of the Lord was the burning bush. Um, so the next question is, did Waraka have the Quran to know the Quran's account of that story? So there is an account of the burning bush in the Quran, but by this point in time, Waraka would not have had the Quran as only 5 ayats were revealed during this period of Waraka before he died. So, which scriptures would contain that story? Well, of course, it's the Torah, specifically Exodus chapter 3 and 4. So, let's have a read. So, again, you can pause this and read everything in its entirety for full appreciation. Otherwise, you can just hear me summarize the key points. So, essentially, Moses, while tending sheep on Mount Horeb, sees a bush burning but not consumed. God calls out from the bush by his name and tells him, "Take off your sandals, for the place where you're standing is holy ground." God reveals that he has seen suffering of the Israelites in Egypt and heard their cries. And God commissions Moses to go to Pharaoh and lead his people out of Egypt. Okay? So you can see here, I am the God of your father, a God of Abraham, God of Isaac, and God of Jacob. And I will send you to Pharaoh. Okay. Then Moses asked, "What shall I tell them your name is?" And God said to Moses, "I am who I am," which in Hebrew is Yahweh. That's the name of God. And so He then goes on to say that go and gather the elders of Israel together and say to them, etc., etc., everything that's here. Um, and then again, if we go into chapter 4, essentially Moses questions his ability to convince the Israelites and Pharaoh. So God gives Moses three miraculous signs to prove his authority. First, a staff that becomes a snake and back again. Then Moses' hand becomes leprous and then healed again. And then the water from the Nile turns to blood. Yeah. Okay. So Moses then tells him that please send someone else. I am not eloquent. I'm not a great speaker. And God responds and says that He created the mouth. Um, However, Moses is still a little bit resistant to say, "Look, I'm really not great at speaking. I'm a terrible public speaker," essentially. And so God then says that He will allow his brother Aaron to assist him. So Moses then meets with Aaron, and explains everything that he's being sent by God to go to Egypt to free the Israelites, and Aaron is convinced. Okay, then you have together Aaron and Moses, who then convinces the the Israelites in Egypt, the elders in Egypt, of their mission, and the people believed. So again, you can pause and read it in its entirety if you wish, but I think that's a fair and accurate summarization. So let's compare the two accounts. So when we look at the spirit that visited Prophet Muhammad, the response was that Prophet Muhammad was fearful and he asked Khadijah to cover him until his fears were subdued. Okay, this is vastly different to Moses. When God called Moses, Moses wasn't fearful. He believed he's speaking in the presence of God and he believed that he's been sent on a mission by God. Okay. Now we see in sort of second stage, Khadijah was trying to convince Prophet Muhammad that actually, no, there's nothing to fear. You are a messenger of Allah. You are a prophet. Um, Whereas Moses didn't need this assurance. Moses knew of his prophethood and that he just needed assistance on how to deliver the speeches to Pharaoh and the Israelites and signs and wonders. And so Moses met with Aaron and convinced him. Okay. And then in the third stage, we see Waraka, after Khadijah introduces Prophet Muhammad to Waraka. Waraka convinced Prophet Muhammad that it was an angel. It was the same angel as the one who provided revelation to Moses. And at that point, Prophet Muhammad is convinced that he is a prophet. However, that's not mirrored with Moses because Moses already from the beginning understands his um, relationship to God and his mission from God as a prophet. And so in the third act, we see that he and Aaron convinced the leaders of Israel. Okay, so that's the sort of parallels or the themes that we can draw from the two accounts. So a couple of questions just to get us thinking. So the question is, how could Waraka know it was the same angel that appeared to Prophet Muhammad and Moses? Because, and the reason why we ask this question is because Waraka was not present for either the angel of the Lord revealing himself to Moses, because that would have happened way back before Waraka was alive. And then obviously we know that Prophet Muhammad was alone in the cave when the Spirit descended upon him. So he was not present for either event. However, based upon the accounts, Waraka thought that the experiences are so similar. However, we've just gone through the account in the Hadith and we've just gone through the account from the Torah, and we've seen for ourselves they're not similar at all. Okay? So, what can we conclude? Well, Waraka was wrong, and unfortunately, Prophet Muhammad was not literate, so he could not read or write. So, therefore, Prophet Muhammad could not double check what people said about the Torah. So he couldn't fact check Waraka. When Waraka said, "Oh, this is exactly like Moses," well, Prophet Muhammad couldn't then read the Torah for himself to determine if that's true or not. Had he have read for himself, then he would have easily established that actually these are not similar. However, we're not in the same situation. We can read both accounts for ourselves, and therefore we can draw the conclusions that we are drawing right now. So what I want to do is just summarize what we've done so far, not just within this conversation, but through previous conversations. We first of all looked at the Quran and how it affirmed the Torah in the time of Prophet Muhammad in the 7th century, and that we have manuscripts predating that time. So we had the Dead Sea Scrolls, which is from the time of the perfect isnad, or the unbreakable chain between Moses, Musa, and Isa. Musa to Isa, Moses to Jesus. Okay, and that all of the manuscripts that we have, not just the Dead Sea Scrolls, but the Septuagint, the Masoretic text, the commentaries of the early church fathers, and general commentaries from other authors around the Torah, all accord with what we have today. Okay, so we know what we have today is what was back then. We then looked at comparing some of the stories found in the Quran and Torah, specifically the stories of the old prophets like Jacob, like Joseph, and and other prophets. We also looked at mixed stories of Gideon and Saul and David, and we saw actually they're not the same. They contradict on many major points, and so these stories are completely irreconcilable in many ways. So the author of the Quran is not the same author of the Torah. They just can't be. Then we looked at, according to the Torah, that Abraham and Ishmael never traveled to Mecca and they didn't build the Kaaba. And since they didn't build it, it was pagans who established it. And then we looked at if it can be claimed that Islam is an Abrahamic religion. And according to Torah, this cannot be. Then we looked at Ishmael in the fact that he did not marry an Arab woman, a woman from the tribe of Durham, but indeed from Mecca, but instead he married an Egyptian woman because his mother was Egyptian and they settled in the area near to Egypt, and it was quite, it's just common, it just sort of makes sense that his mother would pick a wife from her own people group. And then we saw from the Torah that he lived in the region of modern day Jordan, the wilderness of Paran at the time. So Prophet Muhammad was not an Ishmaelite. Prophet Muhammad was not a candidate for prophethood because he did not have Abrahamic ancestry. And then in today's discussion, in this video, we've looked at Prophet Muhammad's spiritual experience, and it did not follow in the pattern of previous prophets like Moses. We saw clear differences. Moses believed straight away, and then sort of went on to perform his mission, whereas Prophet Muhammad did not believe the revelation straight away. He, in fact, was fearful. And his wife Khadija tried to convince him, and that was not successful until his wife Khadija introduced him to his cousin Waraka, who then said, look, it's in the Torah, and the way you've been given revelation is exactly the same the way Moses was given revelation in the Torah. And so on that basis, Prophet Muhammad accepts that he's a prophet, but obviously he cannot check the scriptures himself because he's illiterate. And so unfortunately, Muhammad could not check the claims of people like Waraka or later rabbis who likely told him false information about that, which convinced him he was a prophet from God. So I know there's a lot to chew there, there's a lot to think about there, and I'm always open to anything and everything. So if you've got some comments, some feedback, let's discuss it. I always try to re-evaluate my conclusions in light of new data. So if you do have new data, great. But I hope this makes sense. And if you've got any thoughts or comments, I would obviously love to hear about it. So now that we've seen what the Torah has to say on some of the key points that the Quran makes, and we've seen it doesn't line up, now what I want to do going forward is actually look at the Torah and start to evaluate what the Torah itself teaches. So what is it that the Torah teaches if it's not teaching what the Quran claims it to teach? So I think that would be an interesting area of study as well. All right, then. I look forward to hearing your responses. Bye.